So they are calling him the Kingmaker. This week, every single candidate endorsed by New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani kicked down the door of the Democratic establishment and announced that they're not going anywhere. 3 for 3. Brad Lander won in the 10th Congressional District, beating incumbent Congressman Dan Goldman. Daria Liza Avila Chevalier ousted incumbent Adriano Espaillat in the 13th District. And in the open 7th District, Claire Valdez beat the borough president endorsed by the retiring incumbent by double digits. 2 Democratic sitting members of Congress sent home, sent packing. The candidates personally backed by the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, beaten, vanquished. But the story is bigger than Mamdani and New York. This slate of progressive candidates says as much about the public mood as it does about one mayor and one city. And these wins come at a moment when the cost of living has become unmanageable for ordinary Americans in every corner of the country, working families, even as this country gets dragged into wars stretching from South America to the Middle East. This is the same momentum that made Mamdani mayor last November and handed Democrats the governorships of New Jersey and Virginia. Republicans are already trying to make Mamdani the face of the Democratic opposition, but the mayor, however, sees the victories here very differently. He called them proof that voters are hungry for a new kind of politics, a Democratic Party, he argues, that puts working people back at its center. But it is worth reconciling that two things can both be true. First, this is not the clean referendum on November that either side wants it to be. Republicans are deeply unpopular right now. They are unpopular whether the Democrat on the ballot is a Democratic socialist or a centrist. All you got to do is look at the rest of Tuesday's map. While the left sweep was in deep blue New York City, moderates, of course, won the races that are far more likely to determine control of Congress. So this is less an indication of who will control Congress in November than it is evidence that the Democratic Party is in the middle of a long overdue internal reckoning. Or as Politico put it, moderate Democrats, quote, have a more fundamental fear that progressives are becoming more mainstream as they keep winning, reshaping the Democratic Party. But maybe the answer isn't to lash out at the party's left flank, but to recognize that Democrats are a big tent coalition and to meet candidates where they are instead of burrowing their heads in the sand. Even Hunter Biden, you might have seen this, read the room. A man whose father built a 50-year career on centrist politics. After the stunning primaries here in New York, he offered a few lessons for his father's party, writing, in part, endorsements from the current Democratic leadership now read like warnings. Conviction beats caution. The candidates who said hard things about rent, about who pays for what, about Gaza, they won. The triangulators lost. The middle is not a strategy. It is an empty room. Voters reached past the establishment to grab someone who actually believes something. Don't fear the base. Court it. The Democrats who ran from their own voters lost. The ones who ran toward them won. And the thread running through all of it, he noted, was pretty simple. The cost of living is everything. Everything else is wallpaper. Which brings us to one of the few things that Washington actually did agree on. Congress passed a bipartisan housing bill designed to build more homes and lower housing costs and limit how many single-family homes private equity firms can buy up. A rare veto-proof bill with support from both parties. Donald Trump's response was, predictably, to throw another tantrum and refuse to sign it. Instead, he held the bill hostage. He said he won't act until Congress passed his voter suppression bill, the SAVE Act, voter ID, aimed at preventing so-called non-citizen voting, which is already illegal and exceedingly rare. What the bill actually does is make it harder for U.S. citizens to vote by requiring specific documentary proof like a passport. So let's be clear about this trade that Donald Trump is demanding. He's saying he wants relief from the housing crisis in exchange for new barriers to the ballot box. Barriers that are designed to solve a problem that does not exist. A solution in search of a problem. At a moment when Americans are pleading for help with the cost of living, the White House is using housing affordability as leverage for an unrelated political fight. That is not a man wrestling with the cost of living. That is a man who does not feel the cost of living and doesn't seem to give a damn that any of you do. But here's what the numbers say. The economy and the cost of living top virtually every single national poll. Democrats are running ahead of their 2024 margins in this cycle's special election. The ground is shifting. The Republican Party's response to this reality has been to point at Zoran Mamdani and yell, socialist, to make him the face of the Democratic Party. But you cannot scare people away from a candidate by quoting his positions on things like the price of rent when they agree with him about the price of rent. That also helps explain why Republicans are so desperate to change the conversation, not back to affordability, but back to imaginary crap, voter fraud, fear-based politics, and the old communist boogeyman. Because if this election is about the cost of living, Republicans know that they are in deep trouble, which helps explain Trump's obsession with the SAVE Act. He appears to be realizing that MAGA's time is running out. And if there is one through line that defines Donald Trump's political career, it is this. When he cannot win the argument, it's him who tries to rig the rules, to cast doubt on elections, to make voting harder, to attack the guardrails of our democracy. For more on this, I am joined by Tara Raghavir, director of the Tenant Union Federation. It is so good to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jacob.
You have spent years organizing tenants along these very issues. What is it like to see this moment in American politics today?
It's incredible. And I think, as you said, this is a long time coming. This reckoning in the Democratic Party and in American politics has been years in the making as the cost of rent has gone up, as the pain keeps getting deeper for working families who are paying more than they've ever paid for the worst conditions they've ever endured. So what we saw on Tuesday night in New York was a sweep, and it's so hopeful to see people demand a politics that prioritizes people over profits and war. And also, as you said, this is not just New York, and it's not just the Mamdani effect. I'm thinking about congressional candidates like Sam Forstag in Montana, a firefighter and a union leader who ran on housing, and he won his primary on June 3rd. That's after he stood on the strike line with trailer park tenants who went on strike on May 1st. This is a national reckoning, and it's way overdue, and working people will benefit from it.
In my hometown of Los Angeles, the most unaffordable city and the most unaffordable state in the union, where income inequality is more severe, I think, than almost anywhere in this country, Donald Trump acts surprised that Nithya Raman, the progressive challenger to Karen Bass, passed Spencer Pratt as the votes were fairly and accurately counted. But her whole mission has been to make the election there about renters versus homeowners, the haves and the have-nots, what it is like to hold it down. To me, it's not that that something has changed. It's just that people are starting to see. It's like these fissures. We have X-ray vision. We can now see them so clearly. And in Los Angeles, it potentially could redefine the mayoralty in the second largest city in the country.
That's right. And it's everywhere. It's Will Lawrence in Michigan. It's Justin Pearson in Tennessee. It's the new mayor of Washington, D.C. This is not a phenomenon that's restricted to New York or Los Angeles. It's not purely an urban phenomenon. We see working class people turning up in droves to rallies about fighting the oligarchy in every corner of the country. We see people protesting data centers in rural America. And this really is a new way forward in American politics for those who are willing to listen. And I think what we're seeing with Nithya's campaign in L.A. and the D.C. mayorship as well is that politicians who are savvy are shifting in the direction of working people and their demands. They're talking about an economy that's rigged, and they're talking about who did the rigging, and they're proposing authentic solutions that would actually change people's lives.
I was watching Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez last night talk to Jen Psaki on our network, and, you know, the way she was saying that the working class and working people need to be centered in this conversation seems so obvious to anybody who actually gets out of a studio like this and goes anywhere and talks to people. Wherever I am, anytime I'm traveling somewhere and you're in a cab or in an Uber or whatever, you talk to the driver of the vehicle and they say, this is not my only job. And in fact, I probably have 2 or 3 jobs. Why is it so hard for politicians to see that?
I think there's a fundamental lack of curiosity, right? We saw this, unfortunately, in the last administration, where there's a story that Democratic Party leaders often want to tell about the success in the economy. And we saw a lot of what I can only characterize as patronizing behavior to people across the country who were told the stock market is good, jobs are up, But that doesn't matter when you can't pay the rent, right? That doesn't matter to Pauline, an 80-year-old tobacco farmer in rural Kentucky, right, who, by the way, may not be a lifelong Democrat, but is disaffected by politics as it is today and is looking for authentic politicians who are genuinely curious about her experience and are ready to propose solutions that matter to them. I think, economic populism is the politics of the day, and the politicians that are curious about what's going on for people and the pain that they're under are the politicians that are going to succeed moving forward.
There's no doubt about it. You wrote after the 2021 elections that tenants have established themselves as a political force, and clearly this year's primary results validate that in some way. And not to go back to L.A., but that's the whole Rahman strategy, is that it's not the existing coalitions of geographical or identity-based, but working class versus the people that rent and the people that own. Is that simplifying it too much?
It's not simplifying it too much. I think it's tenants and workers who are defining a new political bloc in this country. There's labor unions and there's emerging power in tenant unions, which could be for poor and working class people in the 21st century what labor unions were in the last century, uniting people across race, across geography, and in some ways across class. There's middle income tenants who are struggling, as well as working class and poor tenants who have been struggling for a long time.